You recognize that tune, and you know it's time for Relics Radio. This is a family-friendly show, so the entire family can join us as we talk metal detecting and relic hunting. You can call into the show at 270-495-0315 or join in the chat and post any comments or questions you might have, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. You're listening to Relics Radio of Southern Kentucky and Middle Tennessee. And Relics Radio is going live again. It is January the 17th. 2019, and we are coming to you from the Cumberland River Valley of Southern Kentucky and Middle Tennessee, affectionately known as 2.5 Rednecks with a Metal Detector. I am your host, Digging with 7.
And I'm your co-host, Tennessee Jeff.
What's going on tonight, Jeff?
Oh, not much. Waiting on this rain to pass through where we can go do a little metal detecting tomorrow. It's rained, and I mean, it's going to be mud no matter where we go. Yeah, it will. Get on a high spot, maybe where it drains or something, and might get into a little bit drier spot. I tell you what, they're talking about some rough weather, though, here Saturday. Going to be up in the 60s, and we're going to have a lot of wind, and we're going to have some thunderstorms and everything. And then the bottom drops out of it Saturday night and on into Sunday. I mean, it's going to be cold. I know it. I was supposed to go to East Tennessee Sunday night and hunt Monday, but it's going to be so cold, I don't believe I'm going to make that trip. And what are they saying, like in the teens, single digits? Yeah,
and well, I've seen the teens. We don't have the weather here that they have up north. I mean, rarely does our ground ever freeze. Been a few years since that has happened, and it doesn't last long. So this is really our peak hunting season. But whenever you've got all the rain that we've had, it doesn't help us out all that much as far as being able to go hunting somewhere. Although it does, increase the signals in the ground if you can get where you can get to them.
I know it. As soon as you dig a hole, your hole fills up with water, and then, of course, it's over then. I mean, then your next thing you know, your gloves are wet, your pants are wet, and then you're just miserable after that. So.
Yeah, you are. Hey, guys, let you in on just a little bit of a secret because it's going to kind of change the format of our show just a little bit. We're still going to run an hour and a half live here on Spreaker, but we're in negotiations right now to syndicate our show worldwide with an outfit that is based in Arizona. And so we will probably run our segments the same as we have been. This is going to be good for our advertisers. It's going to be good for us. It's going to be good for our listeners. But we can only have like a 57-minute show. So we're going to try and jam just as much as we can in the first 53, 54 minutes of this show for syndication, and then we won't open our phone lines until after that. So just hang on. We're going to let you call, and yes, we can still take calls here on Relics Radio. I know a lot of people are having trouble with it. We are not having any trouble. We'll take your calls here in just a little while. We got a great guest. We got a great show lined up. Go ahead and introduce him there, Jeff.
He's the bottle master, Brandon Nicholas.
Hey,
how's it going, Brandon?
Good. I appreciate y'all having me on tonight.
Appreciate having you here. We've been looking forward to this show. As I told you before the show started, because bottle digging, and that's not all that you do, and we're going to let you tell us a little bit about your history in a moment, your background, but we've been wanting to pick the brain of somebody that does bottle hunting, can help us find privies or bottle dumps and things like that. And since we've never done it, we want to know as much as you know in an hour and a half that you can tell us tonight. So we're gonna give you the floor here tonight, and hope that you tell us everything that you can in an hour and a half. Let's just start out with your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into all of this.
Well, I'll start off by telling y'all I do live in Alabama in the Birmingham area. I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Roll Tide, even though we lost the national championship. Aside from that, I got into this through my dad. I am a second-generation digger. My dad was digging in the late 70s, early 80s. It all started with him as a teenager hunting, walking through a pine thicket, and a piece of pine straw rubbed across the top of an old whiskey bottle made a nice little squeaky sound. He picked the bottle up from the ground, and it instilled in him rather quickly that, hey, there's some cool old bottles out there. And it carried on until he was in his 20s, which was in the 80s, and he dug dumps and metal detected and did a little bit of everything while I was really young. I'd say 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. And truthfully, I didn't really get an interest for it until I'd hit around 20 or 21. I grew up seeing it, and he took me out, and we did a little bit of metal detecting when I was younger, but I did not see the joy or the thrill in it, which is interesting. He didn't take me bottle digging until I was 21, though, because of the dangers behind it. But Dad got big into arrowhead hunting, and that was something that we did enjoy when I was a kid, was arrowhead hunting. So we would travel down to Dothan, Alabama, and we would hunt for arrowheads in Dothan, Alabama, in the peanut fields, which there's abundance of them down there if you know anything about the area. So I learned about hunting for arrowheads, only surface finds. We never dug for them, but that was a very enjoyable hobby that I enjoyed all the way until I still do. So that was actually what we did while I was growing up. And so I've kind of been in all three corners of the relic world in the sense of arrowheads, bottles, and metal detecting. One thing led to another, and after I got married in 2006, me and my wife, we were looking for a hobby to do together, and she wanted to start metal detecting, and we started metal detecting a little bit. And like I said, we got into bottle digging together, and that has been actually our pride and joy. It turned into something that not a ton of people do, and there's a ton of research to be done on it. And our area is really abundant with really rare Coca-Cola bottles, and that's one of the things that I like to go after, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But yeah, it kind of led into me here about a year and a half ago deciding to try to start a YouTube channel, and that's where Adventure Archaeology came in. And we started filming a little bit of what we do, and people really responded to it quite well, and it's really blossomed in the past year, and people have enjoyed seeing what we do, and I've enjoyed sharing it. To me, I don't really care as much about the finds anymore as being able to share what we do and teach people about what we do, because not a ton of people know about bottle digging. So now that I've been doing it for around a decade, I'm not the most seasoned digger, but I've learned enough to at least pass some of my knowledge on and be on shows like this one, which is really enjoyable.
Wow, that's good. Tell us a little bit about Adventure Archaeology, your YouTube channel, and all the help that you have. I've seen some videos, and you have the whole family out there pretty much. I know your wife and your dad, and of course a few others. Tell us a little bit about that and when it got started.
Well, it's one of those things where me and my wife, like I said, we started out metal detecting. I never thought that she would be into bottle digging just because of the sheer amount of work and how dirty you get. You know, you get dirty when you're metal detecting, but you get really dirty when you're out bottle digging. And she loved it. I mean, right away, she ate it a lot. She just ate it right up. I mean, she jumped in the hole. She'll be down there at the bottom of the hole before I know it, and I just about have to kick her out if I want to get down there. But that being said, she slowed down a lot, so you haven't seen her in a ton of my videos because we now have a 2-year-old daughter, so that's slowed her down a good bit. But when my daughter gets old enough, I plan on having her out there in the safe places to dig for sure and passing it on.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a good time, though, for sure.
Oh, yeah. I've got a 18-month-old son now, and I hope he follows along with me in 7, and I hope he turns out to be the same way. But you had some great videos. You found some good stuff metal detecting too, haven't you?
I have. I'm actually part of Team Fisher. So I'm sponsored by Fisher and Technetics, and they've been real good to me over the past year, helping me out with equipment and helping me learn a little bit more about detecting and get me my feet a little bit more wet, so to speak. And we're kind of more of a coin shooter group than anything. There is some Civil War history around here, nowhere near as much as what y'all have up in Tennessee and Kentucky and Virginia and areas like that. But there is an abundance of silver around here in the sense of sidewalk curb strips and stuff like that. So that's where we've really excelled, is on doing curb strips in old houses. So we've had a good time doing that. Found a good bit of silver through the years. I would love to get on some Civil War relics this year. We'll have to see how that goes, though.
Yeah, and, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, how did the whole Technetics thing come about, you being a part of that team?
Well, Russ Balbarona is actually the marketing coordinator for Fisher, or First Texas, for Fisher and Technetics and Bounty Hunter, because, they're all part of the same company. And Russ, what he does, he goes out and he scouts out channels that he thinks are interesting that could be a good marketing place for their product. So my channel stuck out because I wasn't just a metal detector, that I was a bottle digger. So it gave them a larger niche to be able to advertise their market in. So by me not just producing only metal detecting videos, it let them have that wider array to send it out on. They also check for things like Instagram pages, Facebook pages, stuff like that. And I had all of that. So I kind of had a few things to check it off. And I can see that Nick's on here from History Preserved. He's also one of the team members, so he's one of our team members as well.
Yeah, and we recently had Nick on, and I think this last weekend, Nick spoke down at the Central Florida Metal Detecting Club, and they were just blown away by him. He's a great young man. He was a great guest, and everything was, we were very fortunate to have him on, and he's a good teammate of yours, there's no doubt. But you kind of divide your time, I guess, between bottle digging and metal detecting. What percentage goes each way, would you say?
In all honesty, I wish it was 50-50, but it's not. I'm probably 90% bottle digging now and 10% metal detecting. We have an abundance of areas to dig for bottles that I could go to a different dump daily, every day of the week, it seems like, in this area, and pull out good stuff. So it came easier to me to find bottle digging areas than it has good metal detecting areas. And a lot of people will be like, what? That's not possible, because they don't have that in their area. But Birmingham, where we're at, there were actually over 100 bottlers at one point between 1890 and 1930. So there were a ton of different bottles in multiple locations. So a lot of the bottlers would actually have dumps behind their place where they were bottling as well. So there will be small dumps, farm dumps, city dumps, privies. I mean, there's just an abundance of things around here to be able to dig. So it's definitely easier for me down here to do that.
Well, see, we're exactly the opposite, or I think we are. Wouldn't you, Jeff?
I think we are too. And of course, we don't have very many city dumps. Well, especially where I'm at. Of course, I'm in a little rural community, and we mainly have just the rural privies and then latrines and stuff like that. But I mean, the biggest town closest to me was Gallatin, Tennessee, and unfortunately, they're old. I guess the first city dump is under a golf course right now. So, and there's a creek that runs along the golf course, and I've tried to get permission, and of course they're worried that I'm going to mess the golf course up. So, but we just have pretty much just rural privies.
And you were
funny. There's actually a dump. Oh, sorry. I was going to say there's actually a golf course on top of a dump here as well.
So if you have a bad game, they just dump you, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we were talking about your background and everything. I was kind of surprised to know that the history of Coca-Cola goes back as far as it does, especially in your area. Talk to that just a little bit.
Yeah, our area is known for, basically, they call it the Magnificent Seven. And what that stands for is it's 7 Coca-Cola Hutchison bottles. And we'll talk about the Hutchison style bottles a little bit later, but That's the oldest variant of bottle that Coca-Cola put their bottles or bottled their bottles in. And those 7 bottles were made in multiple areas, but the rarest is in Bessemer, Alabama, and Jasper, Alabama. And those are all within an hour of where I live right now. So it's very, very possible that we could run across one of those at one point. And of those 7 variants, the cheapest of the variants is a $2,500 bottle, if that tells you anything. The most expensive is when as high as $10,000. So, I mean, you're finding a small fortune when you find one.
Man, I could not imagine the Magnificent Seven. What about that? But I mean, I find I've got one little dump. Of course, I haven't dug in it. I've just scraped the top of the ground, and it has potential. And I have found several Coke bottles, but nothing that I know that's old. I mean, these are just the regular old Coke bottles that you would return for like maybe 10 cents when you were a kid or something. But I would definitely love to get in some of them old Coke bottles.
Yeah, and he mentioned the Magnificent Seven there a while ago, and I started to, like Andy Griffith, say, I'm right, chair. And I know somebody's going to ask in the chat, because they always do. I got my nickname 7 because that was my baseball number, and then our boy Austin, throughout his whole baseball career, wore that number 7, so it's a good number for us. But that's amazing. What year? What is the oldest year that Coca-Cola would have made a bottle then, or did you tell us that a while ago?
I didn't tell you the exact age, and I don't have the exact date. I think we're guessing around 1898 here in our area is the oldest, because the Hutch bottle that we think it was manufactured in Birmingham probably between 1897 and 1905. So, I mean, we're not talking about 150 and 160-year-old bottles, but, 120 or 125 years old, it seems to be the prime target for a really valuable set of bottles in our area. So we don't have to dig super old stuff to get super rare, super valuable, which also makes things a little easier on us.
That sounds good. 7, I thought they called you 7 because your mama dropped you on your head 7 times when you was a baby.
Well, I definitely wasn't the 7th son, so that didn't apply to it or anything. Hey, with all the bottles and everything there, what's your competition like with other bottle diggers in your area?
Well, it's funny. You can do a little bit of research on Alabama, and Alabama is a pretty good-sized bottle digging state. At one point during the 60s and 70s in Mobile, Alabama, there was guys that were bottle digging as their career. They were doing it full-time and selling their bottles to antique stores and made enough money doing that was their job. It has slowly but surely kind of petered out, and there's not as many people digging as there once was. Even 10 years ago, whenever I started, there was a lot more people than what there are now. A lot of the guys are older, and they're getting into their 60s and 70s, and they're getting to a point where they don't want to dig 8, 10-foot hole or 12-foot hole to get some of this stuff. They've already got it years ago, and they've got past their prime, so to speak, and it's just got a lot more difficult for them. So it's really slowed down. We don't have the competition that we once did, and to tell you the truth, I don't know that there's very many people as crazy as we are to dig as deep as we do, so that makes it a little easier too.
I know. You guys have some massive holes. I mean, scary-looking holes. And I can just imagine, can't you, Jeff, some of our landowners come out and walk out in their field, and they look down in the hole, and we just look like little ants down in there.
I couldn't imagine. And then, of course, I've seen, they'll hit the bottom of the hole, and then, of course, it'll cave in, and then, of course, bottles go everywhere. And I couldn't imagine our landowners walking up and seeing a hole like that. But I mean, if we was pulling $2,000 bottles out, then they would be, let me go get my tractor and front end loader.
Yeah, I can see Mr. Stone helping us out real quick right there.
He sure would.
Well, Birmingham in general, which is where 90% of our digging is taking place, is sadly, a lot of it has really gone to pot, and there's a ton of areas that are just really abandoned. I mean, and you'll have thousands of acres that used to be houses that have been torn down or burnt, and there's nothing left of that entire area. And a lot of it, they don't even know who the owners of the lots are anymore. So it's went back to the city, and there's back taxes owed on it, stuff like that. And we found a dump where we could have paid $200 and bought all the lots that the dump was on. I mean, it's to that point where we can buy the land if we want to.
Man.
I tell you what, that's an idea right there if you've got a spot. Hey, guys, we're coming up on a hard break, and we need to take just a moment here and pay some bills and run a commercial. We'll be right back.
Hey, Seven, we's looking good in our new Redux Radio T-shirts.
Yeah, Ken and Mark Guthrie of Detectives.com done brung them to us.
Yep. And they makes other shirts, too.
Yeah, boy. Detectives.com can handle tees for your club, hunt, or any other promotion folks may have.
Uh-huh. They even got the Wide Pride shirts.
Yeah, them boys does the manatee crawl.
Yeah, scooting on their bellies.
That's what I said. The manatee crawl.
Looks like slugs eating jelly.
Uh-huh. So whether you hunt horizontal or vertical, tell the folks where they need to go, TJ.
www.detectives.com.
Uh-huh.
And I can just imagine what the syndication world out there is going to think whenever they hear that commercial from Detectives.com. But I tell you what, those shirts are fantastic. And everybody that I know that has got one has found more treasure because they bought one. Reach out to Ken and Mark Guthrie with Detectives.com and get you one of those shirts. In this segment right here, we want to talk about research, but we've got some questions that have come up, and I'm going to take the first one, and Jeff, you can have the second one. This is from Wes Stringer. At what point do you know that you are at a privy, and do you know right away, or does it take some digging to find it?
Well, there's a lot of keys to that. A lot of times I usually pull Sanborn maps, and you can look at where the house is at. And in a lot of Sanborn maps, you'll see a little small square on the back corner of the property, 50 to 100 feet from the house. And that'll usually put you dead on where the privy was if you just use the Sanborn maps. And if you do that, then it's down to getting your probe out and seeing if there's any glass in it. Because surprisingly, just because there was a privy there doesn't mean that they filled it in with bottles. So there still is some digging involved. Even if you stick your probe down in there, you may hit some bricks, you may hit some glass. It may all be broke. Privies are really kind of just like a crapshoot, in all honesty. That's why we, in 90% of our videos, we are digging in dumps because we know we're going to find something. It's more of a base that we know that we will find something at that point.
What about people like in my area here? We don't have those Sanborn maps. Our area was too rural to have those. How do people go about locating a privy whenever they don't have those?
Well, then you're based off of hoping that you can find the original house foundation. If you can find that house foundation, you can give yourself a nice little radius to work in. Not necessarily knowing what's the front or the back is going to be the part that'll be difficult. But if you think about it, if you had to get up in the middle of the night back during the 1800s or 1700s and go to the bathroom, you're not going to want to walk more than 50 or 100 feet to get to your privy, especially if it's freezing cold or snow or anything on the ground. So pretty much if you can find the original foundation and spiral out within 100 feet of it and probe all the way around, you will find it eventually.
Man, that's great. And we had one from Chris Hensoff. Does he sell most of his? Do you sell most of your bottles in antique stores or on eBay?
To tell you the truth, we don't sell very much. The only stuff that we sell is if I've got just tons and tons of duplicates of it. Every now and then I will pick up a bottle to flip or something like that I find at a yard sale, but I sell through eBay now. I actually have an eBay store.
All right.
How is it listed then?
It's actually under Southern Diggers, one word.
Okay. So if you folks that are listening, if you've got an interest in some of these bottles that Brandon may be selling, well, go to that YouTube page and you might find what you want. Rick Ward had a question. He said, "What is your favorite probe?"
Right now, I've been using the Old West bottle probe. That's who I've been using. I'm not affiliated with them or anything like that, even though you've heard me talk about them in other videos and stuff that I have. To me, they make probably one of the best probes. It has a rounded carbide tip on it. Also, the handle is hollow at the top where the rod comes into. And by the handle being hollow and the rod being welded to it, it lets it kind of make a more of a sound whenever you hit glass. It lets it kind of reverberate up through the shaft into the handle. And that's kind of what they refer to as a singing probe. So the ting noise of the probe hitting the glass just kind of sounds a little bit more projected so you can hear it a little easier.
Man, that's a great probe out here.
Anita Jackson. Hold on just a second. I got a follow-up on that. What's the price on that probe?
Usually it costs $10 per foot. They'll make them all the way up to 15 feet, I believe. And I don't even know how you would use a 15-foot probe. But yeah, they make them all the way up to 15 feet. I use a 5-foot, and my digging partner, Clayton, he uses a 6-foot probe. So we kind of got the best of both worlds. And not always are you going to be able to hit something at 6 foot, but you may have to dig a 2 or 3 foot pilot hole and then use your probe. So, I mean, there still might be a little bit of digging involved in the front side of it.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, that answers my question there, or follow-up that I had on that. Go ahead, Jeff.
Anita Jackson, she was asking, have you ever had one collapse on you?
No, we have been very fortunate in over a decade of digging in 10, 15-foot holes. We have been very cautious, even though sometimes in the videos it doesn't look like it. We've been very cautious and used a lot of methods that we've learned with time, and we have avoided it. We've had bricks fall out of the ceiling and hit us. That's why you'll see us wearing hard hats from time to time. That's probably the biggest fear. But usually you can read a cave-in. If it's not, like you said, with the rain right now, it's really dangerous to dig as a bottle digger after it rains because the ground's so much softer. So we try to dig when it's drier, and that also helps us because you can read the cracks in the soil, and that allows you kind of a roadmap to what's about to happen in the hole.
Yeah, I watched some of your videos, and one of them that I watched, y'all had evidently had some rain, and you were having problems, there was a stump holding most of it up there, and you said if you got much further that it was just all going to collapse. So I guess with experience, you learn how to read all those things.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, it doesn't take too many times of digging a big hole and it collapsing. Whether it lands on you or not, you hope it doesn't, but it just collapsing everything back into the hole and you have to dig it back out, and you learn pretty quick because the holes we're digging are the size of a small car. You're going to try to figure out how to keep that soil suspended above you as long as you can. Otherwise, you're doing nothing but digging with no finding. And
I'm going to tell you something. Whenever you say y'all are digging holes the size of a car, he's not exaggerating. You need to go over to Adventure Archaeology and just look at some of the holes that these guys dug. And I'll tell you the honest truth. I'm too old for that. I can't do that, Jeff.
I don't know if I don't think I can either. And when you said size of a small car, it looks more like a size of a bus. I mean, these are some huge holes, man. And we had another question for, half redneck, Mark Hoover. Do you collect anything else out of the holes but bottles and bricks? Well, what about bricks?
Yeah, we keep bricks that have names on them. I've actually decided to start keeping a ton of bricks, and I was thinking about building a nice brick flower bed or a brick mailbox out of all the old 1890s bricks that I find. I think it'd be cool to have something to show for it. Also, we find coins, we find tokens, we find stoppers. I've found porcelain signs. Marbles, all that stuff comes in the dump. So, I mean, it comes with an abundance of relics.
And, I was watching one of your videos today, and, of course, y'all were deep in there digging bottles, and then I seen it looked like like the curry chain. It was a chain hanging down, and then, of course, I was wondering, well, if y'all guys had got that, didn't know if it was part to a watch fob or it was some kind of little chain hanging down. So, and I'm sure there's all kinds of little goodies in there.
Oh, there's a ton of stuff. The main thing is with it being in a dump, everything's been on fire at some point. Mm-hmm. So, with it being on fire, there's a lot of stuff that's, ruined, but every now and then you find something and you think, how in the world did it survive? I mean, we dig bottles with paper labels that are 120 years old that have been in a dump that's been on fire. I don't know how it works, but just something happens and certain things get preserved. But the chain that you're talking about, I don't know what that chain was. It ended up being about 3 or 4 foot long, and we pulled it out, and I think we ended up reburying it, to be honest.
Okay.
You know, a question that I had, and it came to my mind just watching you guys down in the hole digging, and you know, you've got your shovels and you're hitting the wall there, and stuff's falling down and falling out. Do y'all ever take a metal detector down in there with you and go through what I would call the spoils of that soil that has fallen out?
Well, to be 100% honest with you, that is all iron. Every single bit of it is iron. I mean, if you take a metal detector in there, it's going to light up like a Christmas tree. I mean, it's that bad. There's really no way to go down in there and be able to pick a good target out of it. The best case scenario would be for us to sift all of the material that we move. And that's something this week I'll be addressing in my video, or at least tomorrow, is sifting a little bit, because we have not been doing that. And we've had a ton of people get on to us, but we're slinging so much dirt so fast, it's not always practical to sift every shovelful. So that's one of the reasons we don't do it often. But maybe in the bottom 2 foot in the oldest layer, we're going to try to start doing that.
Yeah, because they'd be buttons and everything, wouldn't they, Jeff?
Oh, they sure would. They sure would be. And then, I mean, you never know what you're going to find. But a lot of your properties that you get permission to do this on, do you have to cover the holes back up and then next time you go redig them, or can you just leave them open?
What we do is we try to dig holes side by side. So when we dig one hole, we leave it open until we're finished. And then when we move next door to it, we throw the dirt out of the next hole into the old hole. So we're constantly refilling, kind of like a dredge scenario with gold mining. We're backfilling ourselves. That way we're not doing double the work for nothing.
Well, that's a good idea.
Oh, yeah, I see. That's a good point there. You've got your initial hole, but then as you dig, you're filling up what you've already gone through, right?
Right, exactly. That's the idea behind it. It doesn't always work that way, and I don't care who you are. If you dig all the dirt out and you got to throw it into the next hole, you're still going to be a little bit shy. But like I said, we're miles and miles sometimes back in the woods. We're in the middle of nowhere where nobody lives. There's no kids or anything playing around. There may be a foot sinkhole. There's not going to be a 15-foot hole when we're done. So
Yeah. So Chris was asking, have you ever put your probe through a good bottle?
No, thankfully I haven't. I know some people have. I rarely use my probe compared to a lot of people because of how much dump digging we do. It's not once you have a dump, you don't really use your probe. Your probe's going to be there to find the dump or find the privy. So we have so many areas already found that we're not using it to find as much as we should be. I really should be out prospecting more. But being a married man with a family, it's hard to get out and do a dig video a week. And sometimes it's just easier to go to the locations that we already know that we're going to find something.
I understand that completely. I'm the same way. So.
Yeah. And Denny Morrison wanted to know, have you ever hit a sinkhole when you're digging? Now, we have a lot of sinkholes here, especially in my area, right here near the house here. We've got a lot of underground caves and everything, and, you know, a field will just open up. But do y'all hit any sinkholes?
Never have, thank goodness. We got all the way to the bottom and hit the water table where the water starts coming up in the bottom. But other than that, no, we've never hit a sinkhole.
Man. I can see me and Jeff now digging a big old hole, and then Jeff look around and 7's gone. Must have been a sinkhole right there.
Yeah, I can see that happening. It'd be a big sinkhole.
It would be that. It'd be
Wes Stranger was asking, do you ever worry about chemicals or gases when you're in the hole?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest things that I'm worried about is not really the gases as much as the asbestos and stuff that they threw away back then. And, they didn't have EPA regulations. So there's got to be a ton of stuff that's not good to breathe in. And we try to wear masks, and then we don't. It's one of those things where we really need to. And I advise anybody that's concerned about that to do so. That's one of those scenarios, I guess, do as I say, not as I do. I wish that I would do it more, but I always forget it. When I get there, I'll be dang if I turn around and drive back to Home Depot to buy a mask. So
That's right. 7, he'd found a trash pit in Culpeper we were hunting. Well, actually, it was a New York camp, and we were digging in it, and, of course, it was stirring up the dust and everything. And when I got home, I got sick, and I was thinking, man, what have I got out of this trash pit we were digging? And finally, I believe it was just allergies. But, I mean, it could very easily happen.
Yeah, you were sick
Oh,
because
yeah, definitely.
you didn't find what you wanted to, nor did I. We found a little bit of stuff though, and that was really the first time that I'd ever dug a trash pit. It was a lot of fun. Of course, we didn't go deep at all. We might have went 2 foot. My goodness, you guys are completely out of sight. Let's get back on to, and I know that Chris Heimsoff and some of them are asking about favorite finds and things like that. We're going to get to all that in segment 4, I believe. But before we finish this segment out, I want to talk more about research. What all tools do you guys use to find the places that you find?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we use Sanborn maps, not just for locating privies, but we use them to get the lay of the old towns. And a lot of times the Sanborn maps will actually have the city stables listed on them. And for some reason during the 1880s and 90s, they would put dumps pretty close to the city stables, I'm assuming because of all of the horse manure and everything. I'm not for sure. That's one of the ways that we can use to locate. The other thing is sometimes the Sanborn maps will have the city creeks located on it. And the reason that that's important is like here where we're at, they have actually rerouted a ton of the creeks that were causing flooding problems in the towns in the early 20s. So where the creeks are now may not necessarily be where they were. So that's where the Sanborn map comes in handy and giving you the lay of where the creek once was. The other thing that we use a ton of is old city newspapers. And that's something that a lot of people take for granted and they don't use. But if your town has a newspaper, even if it was a small one, back then it was big news to talk about anything. And you'd be surprised. They know everybody by name and everything that they did. Well, they would talk about the garbage and the refuse and everything to do with sanitary conditions. And they usually had a sanitary committee in larger cities. And sometimes you can run into these newspapers where they'll actually tell you the location of the dump. It's pretty rare, but you can run into it. But one of the things that you will find a lot of times is they'll be talking about Alderman so-and-so for your town has taken a vote on account of such and such. And it'll be talking about like a lady that lived down the street that was complaining about the stench from the local dump. And they'll give her address. And then you can kind of do a little bit of detective work and realize which way the prevailing winds were in the town and follow the wind, which way the stench would have blown in from to where she would be complaining. And you can kind of just trace it right back to where the dump would have been. So it's just kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
It's just detective work, isn't it? And no matter what you're looking for, what kind of research that you're doing, you just take all the clues that you have and try to put them together. Yeah,
you're exactly right. You just piece it piece by piece together. But that's our 2 biggest assets is Sanborn maps and newspapers.
And you know something, Jeff, watching one of the videos this week that I watched, the correlation between graveyards and dumps. Talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's another thing is, especially in the South, that I think it prevailed a little bit more down here. People were scared of disease. And back then, whenever people died, they were, you had a lot of TB, stuff like that going around that they didn't know whether it was airborne. They didn't know anything about it. So whenever the people died, they usually put the graveyard kind of on the outskirts of the town, and that was because they considered the people to be diseased, even after they were dead. So they would put the dump and the dead close together because they were both diseased and unclean. So a lot of times your dump will be within about a mile or closer of your dump. Sometimes it'll actually be touching the graveyard. So that's another key feature is if you can find a graveyard in an older part of town and kind of spiral out from it, then you may be able to find your dump.
Man, that's great.
Or somebody.
Yeah, or somebody. I said that was great, but really it's not. Can you imagine digging and then you get right into the edge of the cemetery?
Well, I'm gonna tell you something other, Jeff. Chad Comer found the oldest graveyard that would be in my county here. And it was back in the 1780s, 1790s. It's right in the middle of town, and they were wanting to tear it down and make a parking lot, and Chad stopped them from doing that. But it's all grown up and everything. There could possibly be something around the outskirts of that. Of course, you wouldn't dig in a graveyard, obviously, but out from the graveyard, in a spot like that, I could see that there wouldn't be anything wrong with that as long as you cleaned everything up and filled your holes back up.
Yeah, I mean.
Well, usually, I'll tell you where I start at. Usually I go to the city, town, wherever I want to be at, where I'm looking, and I get in the creek that's closest to it and close to a graveyard. And, if there's a creek and a graveyard pretty close by, get in the creek that's close to the graveyard in the town and walk that creek and look for glass. And as you start to see larger and larger amounts of glass, that's where you'll probably want to have a probe with you and get out and probe along the banks. And that's usually where I always start at when I'm doing my research, after I found a town, obviously, that I want to dig at.
Mm-hmm. Didn't most everybody, they just threw their trash at the creek, right?
They would put it right along the creek or in the creek. Back then, they didn't want to put a huge garbage mound or a huge garbage pile on a piece of land that could possibly be used for something later. They would put it in a swampy area or an area that was really muddy or that was prominent for flooding. That way they weren't wasting good land on a dump. So that's why a lot of times you see the old bottles and stuff in creeks, is because they either threw it along the creek bank or right on the edge where it floods at, because that was an area that didn't need to be used.
Mm-hmm. We had another question. Chris, do most of the landowners know that there was a dump on their land?
No, a lot of them don't. There's actually there's a ton of people that never even realize it. You can use little key features to be able to find stuff. Like one of my buddies actually found a dump by looking at the telephone poles in our area, where they had dug a hole to put the telephone pole in. The auger pulled glass up, and there's a whole neighborhood that was built in the 50s and 60s on top of this massive dump. And we got permission from several of the people to dig in their backyards and put it back and, resod it and stuff like that. They had no clue.
Man. Well, during this commercial break, Seven, I'm going to order us an auger.
Okay. We'll be right back then. If your passion is metal detecting, then you know how much your success is based on the equipment you use. Let my buddy Tim Henderson of Murray Branch Outdoors in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, help you with that. Tim is an authorized dealer of Garrett, XP Deus, and Macro detectors and supplies, and he is now an authorized dealer for MineLab. So if you're looking to get your hands on one of the new Equinox 600 or 800, then Tim's your guy. Murray Branch Outdoors is not only competitive in their prices, but the service after the sale is second to none. Tim not only sells detectors, he uses them, and so he can answer any question that you might have. Murray Branch Outdoors also deals in used detectors, and he'll take your old detector in on trade when you decide to upgrade. So give Tim Henderson of Murray Branch Outdoors a call at 615-948-4611 and be sure and tell him that Relics Radio sent you. And by the way, Murray Branch Outdoors in this quarter, January, February, March, is going to give away an Equinox 600 as a gift on the show here live. We don't know exactly what show that we're going to do that. You need to be a follower of Relics Radio here on Spreaker, and you need to be a member of the Relics Radio Facebook group page, and we will put the details out there and probably run most of the contests there on the Relics Radio Facebook group page, and then we'll do the live drawing here. But all of that courtesy of Tim Henderson and Murray Branch Outdoors. We're bleeding into the next segment here, and we kind of wanted to talk about probing and digging techniques and what have you. What can you tell us on all that?
Like I said, I use an Old West bottle probe. I've been using the 5-footer, like I said, with a carbide tip and the hollow handle for the easier sound. I think we went over that pretty well, but as far as digging techniques go, that is something that I'd like to talk about, just because people don't know a ton about what we do. And, like we had somebody ask about if we've been caved in on. So I'll kind of share a few of the tricks that we've learned. Obviously, it would be nice to have these massive holes with, a 10-foot wall in front of you with an ash layer the entire way where you can just pluck bottles out of it. But we've actually figured out that about as wide as we can go, at least in the Alabama soil, is about 6 foot before it starts caving in on us. So usually we try to keep a hole that's about 6 foot wide, and we try to keep the edges where it comes around us rounded. And we kind of consider this to be our method, because if you think about something like the Hoover Dam, if you look at it holding the water back, how it's rounded, the edges are rounded, it's holding all that pressure back. By keeping the edges of the hole rounded where we're at down in the bottom, that keeps the pressure of that bank held back. Now, if we were to square that hole off and make a perfectly square hole, it is nowhere near as structurally as strong. So that's one of the methods that we use to keep the hole up where we can get to the bottom, especially in an instance where we're 10 to 15 foot deep. A couple of the other methods are, I'll talk about safety side of things, is we always try to keep somebody on the outside of the hole while there's somebody in it, and they're sitting really close and they're watching the dirt in front of the person that's in the bottom of the hole. And the reason for that is that hole is shaky because of the ash bed that's in there. And they're always looking for certain cracks and stuff in the soil to prevent it from cracking and falling on somebody. So you're going to have multiple layers in a dump, for instance. I'm going to talk about that more than a privy. But the layers are going to kind of vary. So your top layers, and most of the time in city dumps, are going to be like your soil layer. And that's going to be where they have capped the dump. So when the dump was completed and they no longer used it, they would usually come in with soil, topsoil, and clay. So down here, they used yellow clay to cap the dumps. So you'll have about 6 or 8 inches of topsoil. Then you'll have a foot or two of yellow clay or whatever the clay would be in your area. And then you'll get into the newer stuff because obviously your older stuff's going to be towards the bottom of the hole. At the top of the hole, you're going to have a metal layer. And for some reason, the way stuff always landed and melted and sat in there, that metal layer is going to be tin. It's going to be old pots and pans. It's going to be just whatever you can think of. I found tricycles, stuff like that from the early teens. And then as you go down further, the ash layers are going to break down into your different brackets of age. So about a foot or so, it seems like you move about 5 years in our area. So each foot you go down, you move about five years in age to the older. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And every dump varies. So that's not something you can really go off of until you've dug your hole, and then you can kind of put an age bracket on your stuff.
Man, I would have never thought of that.
And I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something else. You know that you're having a good show whenever people in the chat are saying, "I'm gonna have to re-listen to this and take notes." That's what Celeste said, and that's what I'm saying. You have got some great information that you're sharing with everyone here.
You really do, and I mean, you look at all these big holes, and then of course you get into the safety part of it, and it was. If Seven and I, before this show, if we would have run into, say, a big bottle dump, we would have just squared the holes off. We wouldn't have rounded them like that, and then, of course, it would have probably ended up bad. So
I can see the physics of that, though, because you're distributing the force against that wall evenly whenever you've got an arch, don't you, or rounded off. Right.
You're exactly right. If you can keep it rounded like that, it makes a huge difference. So, and it's funny you say that. It's good information being shared. I've actually had a few people get rather upset with me on my YouTube channel saying that I'm making competition for them. So I had a comment last week that somebody just was all been out of shape and said that if I wanted to be a teacher, that I needed to go teach in a school and not about bottle digging.
Man, well, you look at all the arch bridges, and then I mean they was in Egypt. I mean all over, and then, of course the arch is going to be stronger. So that's pretty much the same way you've got the rounded off in the hole.
Well, I've got sad news for whoever put that on your Facebook group page, because we are already, without syndication, we're already worldwide. We're in Australia and Europe and everywhere right now, and there are just thousands of people that are getting these tips. So you've made a lot of competition tonight, and we're glad for that, too, because you've had a very interesting show.
Yep. Now, how do you... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, well, my response to him was, I've never been scared of competition. That being said, 99% of people think that they want to get into the hobby, and when they first face that first 15-foot hole, they usually back down pretty quick.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I'm going to be the guy sitting on the top of the hole, watching for the cracks and getting ready to say, "You better run, Jeff."
And when you say run, you better run.
That's right.
So how do you tell the difference in between just your regular old farm dump than a city dump?
Usually it's the sheer size of it. A city dump can be 2 to 10 acres or even bigger. and usually the depth of it is going to be a lot deeper, and the amount of trash concentration is going to be a lot greater. Usually a farm dump's only going to be a couple feet deep. It's going to be maybe 50 by 100, and it's usually going to be off of a hill close to a house. Usually the city dumps are going to be in an area, like I said, if you pull a sandboard map or something like that and look at it, where there weren't any houses or anything like that, off of a creek bank or something to that effect, and it's going to be probably 5 to 15 foot deep. And there's going to be a ton of trash in there, a large concentration of trash that's buried. A lot of times farm dumps were never buried. That was just with time, leaves and stuff fell over it, and it just got buried that way. They never took the time to take a tractor or something and push over top of it.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit of the techniques where after you get the bottles you can see out, and then what is it called, something where you hit the bottom of it with your shovel and it collapses? Is there a scientific word for that, or
you're talking about the hole caving in?
Yes. Like
our method is usually we go to the bottom and then we try to tunnel as far as we can to the side without it collapsing, and that's because we want to cover as much ground on that bottom layer, which is the older layer, as we can, and then we collapse it. We do what we just call a controlled collapse. We want it to collapse on our terms, not on its terms. And that's where we'll square the walls up towards the end of the day, and we'll collapse that hole. And we've had a ton of armchair bandits tell us that we're doing it wrong, that, hey, you don't need to collapse your hole every day, you need to leave it open. But there again, on the side of competition, do you really want to leave this 15-foot hole you dug wide open for anybody to get in there and take all the balls that you did the work for? I would rather collapse 5, 6, 7 foot of dirt on top of it and make it really hard for them to get back down there where the good stuff is.
No, me too, most definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be terrible. You go back and all your good bottles are gone.
Our trouble here in the South, though, where we're at, up here in Kentucky and Tennessee, where we got all the hillbillies, if we dug out a big hole like that, come back the next day, there'd be a bunch of rednecks have a swimming pool in it. They'd have a diving board and everything on it, wouldn't they, Jeff?
They sure would. Did I show you that swimming pool we had a while back when I was little?
No.
It was a bed of pickup truck.
Oh, there you go. People thought I was exaggerating, but there you go. That's the redneck thinking. Is it any different digging a privy than it is? Obviously, depth-wise, it's going to be different, but talk about the layers and what have you that you find in a privy.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
I was just talking about the privies. Is it different than digging in a dump? Obviously, I know the depth will be different, but any difference in techniques or anything?
Well, really, I mean, to be 100% honest with you, we don't dig a ton of privies. But the few times that I've been out and tried to dig a privy, there are still layers in it like there is in a dump. And those privies that when you're digging in them, the layer of trash is going to be a lot smaller. So you're usually only going to talk about a couple of feet. And up where you're at, sometimes they're brick lines, so you know the exact boundaries, or rock line, that you know the exact boundaries of that privy. Down here in the South, there's no boundaries. They just dug a dirt hole and, threw a wood box on top of it, and that was it. So you don't know how wide the privy is. So I would say the technique for me is to make a round hole about 3 foot wide, just wide enough to get in there and be able to swing your shovel and go straight down, and then kind of visualize it as an upside-down mushroom, and then just tunnel around the bottom of it and see how wide it actually goes. And if it goes super wide, obviously you're going to have to cave the wall down and move a little bit to the side. But it's funny, the privies actually, some of them look like they actually have an ash layer, even though they don't. But there again, like I said, most of the stuff that we found down here has been broke in privies. So that's why we do not just dig a ton of them.
Yeah. And I would say that layer that you're finding in privies, I know we used to put lime down, just put a layer of lime on top of everything. I'd say that that's what you're finding in privies. May be wrong, but I know that's what we used to do.
You're probably right, to be honest.
How long have they been putting lime on in privies? Because that the home site that we hunted on Mr. Stone's, I dug a hole and started running into it looked like some lime.
Well, I was doing it back in 1862, so I really don't know an answer to that question, Jeff. Sure don't.
Brandon, do you have any idea?
I don't have an answer for that one myself. The privvies were a little before my time.
I know where some are at. I mean, the ones that we used, and could probably get permission to dig them, but I know that they were used not that many years back, and I'd like for them to age and simmer there for just a little bit before I get into it. Hey guys,
I don't want to dig in 7 poo.
No, I don't either. Hey, we're past our syndication time and everything, so we're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines. 270-495-0315. If you've got a question for Brandon, call in. Again, 270-495-0315, and I see that Jeff has already put it in the chat. I know everybody is just dying to know about the finds that you find in these dumps and what have you, especially the old bottles that you pull out. So talk about that a little bit, Brandon.
Yeah, we really the bracket, the sweet spot that we've hit seems to be between 1898 and 1905, like I said. And I'm what you call a pictorial hutch collector. And what that is just any bottle that's a Hutchinson-style bottle with an embossed picture on it. And Alabama had an abundance of them. So they had Indians, they had elk, they had eagles, they had, just anything, like camels, elephants. They had everything on their bottles. And then there was a ton of variants of each bottle that's embossed. So that's what I like to collect. So last year, my pride and joy find was a bottle that I thought that I would never find, and I would have gladly bought if I could even find one to buy, was a pictorial hutch from Pratt City here in Alabama, and it had a Indian on it. And what made this bottle so rare is the slug plate that was around it is in the shape of a watermelon. And there was only 2 other ones known before the one that I dug, and nobody knows where those 2 even went to. They had seen them back there in the 80s, and they were kind of gone. And there were 2 more that were known that were damaged. So thankfully, the one that I pulled was not damaged. And before I could even get out of the dump, I was offered over $500 for it, but it was one of those things where it's the coolest thing I ever found. Why would I sell it?
That's right, man.
Yeah, and if it's at the top of your bucket list too, you're not going to sell it because that's what you've been after.
Yeah, that's the crazy part is it doesn't say Coca-Cola. It was a soda drink. It doesn't say anything like that, but it was a type of soda. Now, the crazy part is those Coca-Cola Hutchinsons that I was telling you about that are going for $2,000 to $10,000. There's 20, 30, 40 examples known of all of them, and they're all still worth that much. Just because they say Coca-Cola, there's a lot more international collectors for that than there are for the local towns. So to me, the small town finds really stand out. Finding stuff from towns that are no longer here, that are ghost towns, or from towns that are super small that used to be big mining towns at one point that are dilapidated and gone now. Stuff like that really appeals to me. And
it looks to me like that they would be worth more because they are such a unique find. Hey, we got a caller on. We got Denny Morrison. Hey, Denny, have you got a question for Brandon?
I got a statement to say. You were talking about sinkholes. I was not talking about a sinkhole. I was talking about a Civil War sink, which was a toilet during the Civil War for 30,000 men camped in an area. And we dug a Civil War sink at Coles Hill near Culpeper, Virginia, dug over 200 bottles out of that, maybe more. Some of those bottles they were Lincoln Log bottles, and they were worth over $2,000 each. Plus, we found something that looked like a glass shoe. Nobody knows what they are, but in that area we found 4 of them already. At the Museum of the Confederacy in Richmond, they don't even have one. Not even one. We found 4.
Wow, Denny. That was on the last day of the hunt, wasn't it?
Yep.
And I remember seeing, I wasn't there, but I've seen the video on it. And, of course, it was found on the last day, and, of course, everybody was digging like a madman. And then finally...
and we also had to fill back in the hole, and actually the farmer came in with a tractor and pushed all the dirt back in for us. We had dug a pretty big hole. But those were called sinks. That's what I was asking you about. Let's see...
Brandon?
There's just big questions to ask. Go ahead, Lloyd.
Yeah, Brandon, have you ever dug a sink?
No, like I said, in our area, really, Birmingham wasn't even incorporated until 1881, which was well after the Civil War. So the age bracket that we're in our general area doesn't allow for the Civil War huts and, like you said, the sinks and things like that. I would love the opportunity to dig a Civil War hut even. I mean, even to find one of those bottles like he was talking about is an amazing find from the 1850s and 60s. It sounds like they got into a really nice honey hole.
Well, we dig huts all, at the Civil War sites in Virginia, and we use John Kendrick made singing. We call them singing probes. And like you, I like the 4 and 5 footer. The 6 footer is just too long. You get into rocky ground, you can't push through that stuff.
Well, Virginia has that really difficult soil to deal with, anyways.
yeah, it does. It is
we've actually got a guy in Virginia that comes to our digging in Virginia hunts, and he does not use a metal detector; he uses a probe. And one time at the Excelsior farm, he actually found a beautiful gold ring after he had dug 16 bottles out of a hole.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've met him before, Denny, and I can't remember his name, but we need to have him on the show sometime just to talk about going to DIV with just a probe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I told Mark about the Streak or Tim Cox. He'd be a good one to have on your program, and that's all he does is look for bottles and trash pits and huts.
Yep. Well, do you have any more questions for
it's a real good show. There's a lot of good questions on here and a lot of good answers. And, I love digging bottles.
Well,
you ever put a probe through it? I haven't. We had a guy on our group. We used to call him Big Shovel. He'd jump on the shovel to dig the hole, and he broke 3 bottles in one hut.
Man.
Yeah. Hey, appreciate the call, Denny.
You guys,
Yep.
I'll get off of here.
Okay.
Let somebody else.
Okay.
Right, thanks for the call, Denny.
Appreciate the call.
Yep.
Hey, Deborah Minnick had a question here. She wanted us to ask Brandon, how do you deal with poison ivy, poison oak, or poison sumac? How do you avoid those things?
I don't. I get it.
Okay, maybe the best question is, how do you treat it after you get it?
Usually I go to the ER. No, I'm just kidding. But no. In all seriousness, I'm bad allergic to it, and usually I do get it about one time a year. And thankfully, in the past few years, I've only had to go to the doctor once to get a cortisone shot. But I don't have a good solution for it. Besides keeping the pass beat down into the dump, that's about the only solution I have, in all honesty.
Man.
I'm not allergic to it. I can sit down in it and it doesn't bother me. But every now and then, whenever I'm digging in the ground, if I'm not wearing my gloves or if I get some dirt in my gloves, I'll get a little irritation in between my fingers, right in that little slot right there. It doesn't really break out. It just itches just a little bit, but not bad. And I've always thought that was probably the root system of poison oak, and you don't have to touch the leaves. I think that the roots can do the same thing to you that the leaves can.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And I seen a spot of Seven sat down in a spot of poison oak one time. He got up and the poison oak was gone. He killed the poison oak. I mean, you just get around Seven walking around grabbing poison oak, it just kills it automatically.
But you guys are probably like us. You don't do as much summer hunting as you do fall and winter, right?
Yeah, I try to do mainly winter hunting, actually. I mean, here in Alabama during the summer, it's 105 degrees, it feels like. I mean, it's usually, in all seriousness, probably between 95 and 100 degrees between June and September. So it's just so hot, it's unbearable. The majority of our digging takes place from about September all the way till March and April. And then we slow back down a little bit, and we try to go back towards creek hunting.
Yeah.
But once you get in the like a 7 or 8 foot hole, does the temperature change or does it just get hotter? Well, I mean, cooler or hotter?
It changes. It's cooler, but the wind stops blowing. So any air that you have moving is completely gone, and it becomes stagnant really quick.
Yeah, and
I seen you was worried about mosquitoes, and then you had the mosquito spray. So I know y'all have to deal with mosquitoes quite often.
Hey guys, we need to run
down here on the side.
We need to run another commercial. We'll be right back. If you want to keep up with what's going on in the metal detecting world, then you need to be a subscriber to American Digger magazine. Butch and Anita Holcomb are the publishers of the magazine and have won awards for 3 straight years for being the best digger magazine on the market. American Digger magazine is available in both print and digital formats, so no matter where you live in the world, you can enjoy the latest happenings in the hobby. You can get in touch with American Digger magazine by going to americandigger.com or give them a call at 770-362-8671. And be sure and tell them that you heard it on Relics Radio. And I'm going to put another plug in for the article that I did on Jeff Ford, Wes Stringer, and Chris Hamsoff in this issue of American Digger magazine. It's called The Great Silver Hoard. If you've got a copy of that magazine, go check it out. If you don't, get a hold of Butch and Anita and get one of those magazines. You know, in this section here, I would like for us to talk about how you clean those bottles. How do you preserve them and what have you?
Well, one of the things you got to worry about instantaneously down here is, like he was saying, is the temperature different in the hole. Well, that's one of the things to take into compensation whenever you're talking about pulling a bottle out of a hole that's 15 foot deep. As soon as you pull it out, it's very real possibility of what I call pings or pressure cracks, and the temperature change very quickly can mess a good bottle up. So one of the things that we try to do is, if it's a really good bottle, it usually stays in the bottom of the hole, and we kind of work our way up out of the hole. We'll dig little levels. I don't show it all the time in the videos. We'll have little steps on the side, and we'll move it up a couple feet at a time to keep the bottle from pinging or pressure cracking. Once it's out of the hole, you're usually okay, but we try to keep it out of the sunlight, throw it into some newspaper, let it adjust to the temperature, and kind of go from there. We've had some good bottles mess up on us on account of that in the past. That's why we're so cautious now. We call it our bottle decompression chamber.
You know, I didn't know that. I had never heard that, and then I seen one of the bottles that you brought out. You said it had that little ping on it, and you talked about the change in pressure and the change in temperature and everything that caused it to do that. So I'm just learning all kind of stuff here.
Brandon, I've seen y'all find some bottles that had the label still on it. How long does it take them to deteriorate after you get it out?
Well, that's the thing is, if you leave the bottle dirty, it'll stay on there for a while. Usually, it'll instantly come off though if you try to clean it. Some people will tell you to spray like a clean or a thin layer of like clear coat for a car on there, and it can preserve it. I've heard other people talk about certain types of glue to put on there to preserve it. I have never found a good way to preserve it myself without it destroying it to get the bottle itself clean. So I'm the kind of person, I would rather the bottle be embossed and clean than have that paper label, and a lot of people will probably disagree with me on that, but I would rather that bottle be really clean and the label gone and the embossing showing than the paper label in a dirty bottle.
Yeah, that's right. I can understand that. So we talked about your bottle finds and everything. What about your best metal detecting find, if you have one?
Well, I mean, obviously, probably like most people, my best find that I've found has been a lost wedding ring that was like a second generation that I helped somebody find. You know, that's one of those feel-good stories. You find something for somebody that they lost that they never thought they were going to get back. But as far as just something super great, probably my most exciting find, and a lot of people will probably laugh at me, was probably a Walking Liberty $50. So that was pretty exciting for me. We find tons of mercury dimes and stuff like that. Occasional older coins like Indian head pennies. But down here, we're not finding anything like the stuff that they find on the Hoover Boys or anything like that. But it's still fun. Anything that's old and in the ground, I'm into it.
Yeah, I'm still looking for my walking liberty. I haven't found one yet. So.
Hey guys, we still have the phone lines open. It's 270-495-0315. If you've got a question for our guest, now's the time to call. And we got a call that's coming in. It's Chris Heimsoff. Let me add him to the group here and get him on. What's going on, cousin Chris?
Hey there, cousin Loy. How you doing?
And Brandon, this is a joke because he won a book from Randy Barnhouse the other night on last Thursday night on the show. And Randy made the mistake of saying, well, congratulations there, cousin Chris. And now we got all kind of people thinking that that we're doing things, just for family. But good to have you on the show.
Favor.
Huh?
I said, y'all do favor.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris.
We're all related.
We are.
Yeah. What question have you got for Brandon?
Hey, Brandon. My brother lives in New Orleans, and someone had told him in privy digging that oftentimes they would dig their privy, put up a privy, and then about every 10 years they'd move over 10 foot. And they told him you could pretty much go in a line and go about decade to decade. Have you experienced that, or is that just a story?
No, that's true. That's 100% true. Usually, sometimes it didn't even make it a full 10 years. Sometimes it only, depending on the depth of the privy, and sometimes it wouldn't even be 10 foot over. It'd only be 4 or 5 feet. So usually if you find one, like he said, you can hit a whole row of them. And if it's on a lot that, say you have like a back fence, shotgun style lot, you can usually go down that entire back fence and find privies.
That's pretty cool. Okay, well, I'll get off. Thanks. That's interesting.
Hey, thanks for the call.
The show.
Thanks for the call, Chris.
Chris.
Another question that was brought up, or a point that was brought up by somebody on one of our past shows, was that back in the old times, whenever they would move a privy, they would plant a tree. Have you ever heard anything about that?
Now that I haven't heard. That would be a first for me. I'm not for sure on that one.
And I don't remember what kind of tree it was. Do you, Jeff?
That was Mad Hal, and it was no, I do not remember the type of tree it was, but it was Mad Hal. So
if you get around an old house site and you see a line of trees, smaller trees, they're not oaks and they're not maples or anything.
Boxwood.
Boxwood trees.
Yeah.
If you find a line of boxwood trees, it's a pretty good indication that is the privy line right there, where the privy was moved from spot to spot.
That's interesting.
So you learned something from us. One thing we've learned learned everything from you. Hey, Liz with Digging Canuck asked a question. Do you find a lot of marbles in these digs that you do?
Tons and tons and tons of marbles. We find, on average, I'd say 5 to 10 per dig. we find a lot of them. So we find clay. We find the painted clay. We find, I guess it's the regular glass. And then I think at one point they even made them out of porcelain. So we found pretty much one of everything. Last year I found the biggest marble I ever found, and apparently they call it a toe breaker because if you dropped it, it'd land on your toe and break it. But it was massive. I mean, it was bigger than a golf ball, and it was a clay marble, so that's pretty cool.
We've got another caller on. Last 4 numbers are 0290. Who have we got, and what's your question for Brandon?
Hey, Seven. This is HD Shovelhead. My question for Brandon, it may have been asked already, but I may have missed it. Down there in Alabama, do they find the cobalt blue bottles and the green bottles down that way?
Hey, good question.
Now, if you're talking about like the cobalt hutches and cobalt, like the torpedo style bottles, not so much. I know that there's a few of them in the Tennessee area that could have migrated their way down here at some point via train or something like that. But as far as us having an actual cobalt bottle, not so much. Now, obviously, we find tons of bromo and cobalt poisons and milk and magnesia, the more common stuff. We find a ton of that. But other than that, there isn't really any cobalt sodas.
Okay.
And what was your name again? What was your name again?
It's HD.
Hasty?
HD Shovelhead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know who you are now. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Got any more questions for Brandon?
That's one off the top of my head. That's all I can think of.
Okay. Appreciate the call. And Cousin Chris, did you mean to call back? You're back on the line again.
Well, I've missed part of it. I was just going to mention one thing about the trees. I was yelling on the chat, catalpa. Here in Missouri, I wanted just to tell Brandon, in Missouri, we find a lot of catalpa trees near the privies because they've got great big soft leaves. And they do. And we called them, well, poop house trees, which we used a different term, but poop house trees because they would plant them near the outhouses. So just going to throw that out. I'll get off the phone again.
The catalpa trees, hang on a second, that's the ones with the worm on it, isn't it? They have the catalpa worms?
Yeah, the big long beans. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it has like those funny... Growing up, my grandmother had one, and it had tons of the... One time a year, the worms would show up. The yellow and green horned worms would eat the leaves on it every year.
Yeah, and it'd have all...
That's interesting.
Have all kind of spiderweb-like stuff on it, too, won't it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Hey, I got one in my backyard.
Well, you may have had a privy back there.
These trees grow real tall. They have leaves that are bigger than the palm of your hand. And they'll get a real long bean on it. Alpha bean.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. Huh, I did not know that. That's neat.
Chris, can we eat them beans?
No, I wouldn't want to eat those beans.
And
here we was.
Or smoke them.
Here,
you could probably eat them, but they might taste like peanuts.
And here we was all of our life using old corn cobs, and we could have had those big leaves. Hey, thanks for calling back in then, Chris, and sharing that information with us. I'm going to look that tree up.
Do. Right, bye, guys.
Okay, see you,
Chris.
Well, we learned something else out of all of this, too.
That's right. We had a question. Will Johnson out of California, he's a good friend of mine and Seven's, and he was wondering, of course, he's into privy digging in California, and he was wondering how to the best way to clean the bottles.
Okay, we kind of got sidetracked earlier, didn't we? Everybody kind of has their own methods on that. I'm a big one for bottle tumbling. There is risk with that. It's kind of like, I don't know, a lot of you are metal detector guys, how you tumble your clad. Well, it's kind of the same principle for bottles, except for the media that would be inside of the tumbler is going to be copper, and the copper chips help polish the bottles. And you can do this and actually turn these bottles that are rough looking back to looking like brand new. Now, if you have a very faint embossing on there, if you leave them for too long in a tumbler, it will take it off. But for the most part, on most of the bottles that we find, I can tumble them and it'll take none of the embossing off and it'll make it look brand new. Now, if you don't have a tumbler set up, there's always the possibility of going to Walmart and buying a baby bottle brush. I know that sounds crazy, but that is the easiest way to clean the inside of a bottle. It has the sponge connect on the bottom of it, and it also has like the wires on that go the full length of the brush. You can just pop that down right on the inside of it, spin it around with a little bit of Dawn, and that'll clean it out. And that's usually the easiest way to go if you do not want to tumble one.
I've seen people clean the inside of bottles out with sand. Have you ever tried that?
Usually I've already got sand and mud in there. So I'm trying to get it out, not put it back in. But, I mean, I can see where it would work. One of the things that I've done, too, in the past is buy the old copper, like Red Ryder BBs, and put them on the inside with a little bit of soap and water and shake them around. And because they're round, they're not going to chip anything up, and that'll help you shake anything loose that's in there.
And you were talking about tumbling with copper. Where would you pick that medium up at?
Jar Doctor. Jar Doctor would be who you want to look up. Jar Doctor sells that copper media. They also sell the full tumbler setup. Now, don't be surprised. They're a couple $1,000s for the full tumbler setup. You're going to be investing a good chunk of money into it. But the copper media, I think it's like $8 or $9 per pound. And the average tumbler, I forget, is like 7 or 8 pounds in it. So, I mean, you're going to spend $80, $90 just for the copper. But once you have it, it's going to last you a long time.
Yeah. And we've got another caller on. The last four numbers are 9181. Who have we got, and what's your question for Brandon?
Oh, but yeah, my name is Mike Stone. Now, I know we were just talking about cleaning bottles. You know what else I found out that it works real well, too, is fish aquarium brushes. Because they come in different sizes. You know, you can use them for, different size bottles, which work real well also.
Right.
That's true. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had several people come to me and go, oh, man, that's a great idea. But, yeah, they work pretty well, too, for the smaller bottles, because you get different size brushes that'll fit in there really well.
Now, where are you located at, Mike?
I'm here in Tampa, Florida.
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you all do you do some bottle digging down there yourself?
Yeah, actually, just recently, within the past month or so, we've found a good sweet spot that we've been going to. We found a lot of old bottles from the 1800s and stuff like that, and found marbles out there as well.
Yeah. Well, this was a show that you're like us. Then you were waiting to hear this because it's been a wealth of information for us.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, good to have you on, and good to have you call in. And do you have any more questions you wanted to, or comments that you wanted to pass along?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was just kind of throwing out there, because I remember he was talking about a baby bottle brush, which they work fantastic as well. But yep. I was just throwing in the comment that the fish aquarium brushes work real well as.
Well,
yeah, I'll try that. I've got a few bottles I need to clean up, and of course I'm not poor with baby bottle brushes. I've got a few of them are laying around too, but actually the one I have, it's a little bigger than for the little medicine bottles I've got. So
yeah,
exactly, yeah.
Well, appreciate it, Mike, and sit back and enjoy the rest of the show. Appreciate you calling in.
Will do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Brandon, what else have we not covered that you were thinking about you'd like to talk about tonight?
I think I've pretty much covered all the bases just a little bit. The thing is, like you said, we could talk hours and hours about this stuff. I think the main thing is if you're thinking about getting into this, is just knowing that it's a long end game. It takes a ton of research, and just don't be disheartened by the amount of research that goes into it. Because if you do find a good dig location, a good city dump or something like that, it's years and years of digging. I mean, I've been digging in one of the dumps I've been digging at now for over 10 years, and it just keeps producing, so that's the good part. I mean, a lot of areas, same thing with metal detecting, people will say that it's dug out and you'll go back with a different machine and pull something good out, or it'll rain and you'll go back and pull something good out. But, it kind of gets a little more sparse. But with a dump, I mean, it's just endless. If you have 10 acres of digging and you've got big holes to dig, it'll last you a long time.
I can imagine so. And it's replenishing itself as you go down. And the further that you go, the older it gets. Or theoretically, that's the way it ought to be.
Right. Eventually you hit bottom, and when you're there, the trash and everything just stops. And at that point, you just got to move sideways. I mean, it's almost like we're strip mining as much digging as we're doing, but not every instance is like ours. So, I mean, in a lot of these places, I would imagine probably in Florida, the dumps probably aren't as deep there. They're probably only 3 or 4 foot deep because of the water table being different. Depending on where you live at, it depends on the depth. So don't be disheartened and think that everything's going to be 15 foot deep. We do have dumps here that are only 4 or 5 foot deep. So, I mean, it's one of those things you can find a really sweet spot with some old stuff in it that's not deep, and that's where you want to be. We just haven't been so fortunate.
Yeah.
Hey, Brandon, I had one question. Say, if you find a bottle dump in the woods, say, how do you get rid of the roots? How do you take care of them? Do you take a chainsaw? I mean, of course, some of the holes y'all dig, I mean, you pretty much have to take up the whole tree to get to it, but how do you go about the roots?
I have a Ryobi cordless sawzall that I carry with me, and it's got a 6-inch blade on it, and that's what I use to get rid of all my roots and everything.
All right.
Ever have any trees fall down when you get done?
Tons.
I've got a little spot. I've got a little spot in a Civil War camp. It didn't have any big trees. They're all small and medium trees. But I actually took some of those small trees out because it was a good spot and dug around in it a little bit. But I tell you, roots can be the most aggravating thing. And you know, metal detecting, the best signal you're going to get is always going to be up under a big root somewhere.
That's right. And I remember that time we was digging out Mr. Stone's, and of course I was stomping on this root. I stomped on it for 30 minutes, had the best signal, and then of course I kept on fussing about this root. And then Seven looked up at me just as serious. He said, "Well, you are digging next to a tree."
Yeah,
I could have hit him with my shovel.
Hey, Brandon, one more thing that I think that you ought to talk about just a little bit. Tell everybody what kind of tools that they're going to have to or need to purchase and have or take along with them if they're going to get into this this portion of this hobby.
Well, your probe is going to be your first one because that's what you're going to need to find your dig location. But once you get a dig location, a spot where you're going to be digging, just a regular old shovel, whether you want a fiberglass or wood-handled shovel, that's going to be doing all your heavy hitting, and then a good metal detector shovel. You know, the longer the better, unless you're in tight spaces when you're digging. So we've actually got a 3-foot and a 5-foot metal detecting shovel, and we use them both depending on how tight of a hole we dug. You're going to need that, and then you're going to need a way to extract the bottles. A lot of people like to use pitchforks when they're digging, a little more so. We don't do that as much down here. We catch a lot of flack for that as well. You know, to each his own, I think. You know, a lot of people say by using a pitchfork, you're less likely to break a bottle at the bottom of the hole. I just see me putting one of those tines at the bottom of it right through a bottle is what I do. I think a shovel's got a better chance of glancing off of it.
Yeah.
But that being said, you're going to need if you want a pitchfork, you're more than, you know, that's a way to go to break the ash layer up. And then to get the bottle out of the hole, you can use the metal detecting shovel, which we do a lot of times. But if you're not a great shot, if you will, with your shovel, you may want to get a nice little hand trowel or even a flathead screwdriver will work. A long flathead screwdriver to push into the ash along the edges of the bottle to break it free. A lot of it's a little tricky getting it out, and a lot of times we know what it is almost instantaneously of just seeing the side of a bottle, so we can be as careful or not careful as we want to be. The thing about it is if you're in a really good area like some of these guys are with the Civil War stuff, you want to take every precaution that you can with a bottle that's 150 or 160 years old. And in that regard, you may want to take a pitchfork and cut the 2 forks out of the center and just have a prong on each side to help you break up the ground.
Yeah.
There again, you could still spear right through the bottle. You know, it's one of those things where it's kind of like flipping a coin. You hope for the best and hope that nothing happens, but sometimes it just does.
Yeah, I mean, even as careful as you can be, you're gonna damage some of them. There's just no way around that. But all good tips. I mean, everything that you've shared I've learned so much tonight. And I'm like Celeste. I'm gonna have to go back through the show and listen to it again and take notes because there's a lot that my old mind just wouldn't process all at one time. But hey, before we get off here tonight, tell everybody about your YouTube channel, Facebook channel, all of your social media.
Yeah, Adventure Archaeology is my YouTube channel. We had a great year last year. We surpassed 4,000 subscribers within a year. So, I mean, it came and went really quick. I was grateful for all the support that we got and all the support that Fisher and Technetics provided to me last year. That being said, if you want to check me out over there, go ahead. I think we have a little over 90 videos now. Some of them are tutorials. Some of them are history clips, which I stole from Seven.
as have a lot of people.
Hey, to be honest with you, when you see something good, I mean, nowadays it's hard to find stuff. And, you know, you do a great thing on your channel with the History Minute, and I've tried to incorporate that with the bottle side of things. So if I find a bottle and I think people want to know about it, then I'll do a History Minute that's about 1 minute long about that particular bottle in the video. I don't do it every video because I'm sure Seven can tell you there's a lot of work that goes into that, actually.
Yeah. Most of mine are about 2.5 minutes or something like that. And I have, well, on average, I'd say I spend 6 hours on one of them. So they are a lot of work. But, yeah, I saw your History Minute, and it really adds something to your channel. So kudos on that. And I stole it from somebody else. I don't remember who it was, but, you know, we're all in this together.
Yeah, you're right. The thing is, I think that people, they enjoy watching what you find, but in general, people want to learn. And that's something that with my channel, I've tried to incorporate a little bit of tutorial stuff along the way. Like tomorrow, I have a video come out on sifting. You know, if you go back a couple months ago, I'll have a how to find bottle dumps. And I've thought about doing a mini series even of bottle digging tips, you know, just to have a little mini series out there for people, because I get questions every week about it. And that's kind of what the YouTube channel is about. This year, we're going to try to incorporate a lot more metal detecting, though. Get more back into that side, because last year I was pretty laxed on it, and hopefully do some Civil War hunting and stuff. I tried to sign up for DIV, but I'm so far down the secondary list, I doubt I'll get to go.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff that I would like to do, and hopefully do some collaborations and dig with some other YouTube channels, and get out there and do a whole lot of stuff this year. So our plans are to do a video a week, and if I can maintain that, I'll be really happy. I do have an Instagram account, which is adventure_archaeology. And that's just where there's kind of some behind-the-scenes stuff that goes on there. It also helps support my YouTube channel. Every now and then I post bottles from my collection and stuff like that on there. I do have a Facebook page, but I really don't promote it very much. But it is Adventure Archaeology and Southern Diggers. So if you look that up, I have a Facebook page for both of those.
Now, what about Twitter? Are you on Twitter as well?
I do have a Twitter account, but I have not been on it in months, so I won't even recommend it. How about that?
You know, I've got Instagram and I've got Twitter, and I'm just like you. Twitter just doesn't get a lot of traffic anymore, and it really surprised me how much traffic is on Instagram. I guess that's the new deal now with everybody. But all great sites, and let me challenge everybody: go to Adventure Archaeology tonight before you go to bed. And help Brandon out. Go ahead and subscribe, watch some videos, like them. I guarantee you're going to get a whole lot more than you got here tonight.
That's right. And then, of course, we had a question. Bill Marsh, Brandon, do you have any experience locating previes in a plowed field? And then, of course, you said something about doing a video of locating previes, or doing some other work. I guess you can throw it in there, or you can answer that question now, just whatever you want to do.
In a plowed field is a really hard one. I do not have any tips for that other than looking for an indentation in the ground. I mean, without a house foundation or a Sanborn map or something to give you a focal point to kind of spiral off from, it's really, at that point, it's almost impossible. You can look for those indentations, but that's still in a plowed field. Y'all know how many indentations are out there.
Bunch. I've dug about every one of them, I think.
I'll give you a tip from experience, and that is when you find the debris field in a field where you think that there was a house there, go to the north side of that, because if they put the privy on the south side, you know, in the winter, the north wind blows, but it's cold and you don't have the smell. In the summer, the south wind blows, and you sure didn't want the privy on the south side of the house. You always wanted it on the north side, or on the side where the wind in the summer would be blowing in that direction, depending on, I guess, where you live. In our area, we always had ours on the north or the northeast side, so that's a tip that might work for some of you.
Right. You're right.
But anyway, it's been a pleasure having you on. You hang on there on the line after we close the show out and talk to you a little bit. I'll let you have the last word, Jeff.
Well, I thank everybody in the comments section. Thanks for all the callers. And Brandon, I really thank you for being our guest. You've been a real great guest, and a wealth of knowledge for sure. We've every one of us has learned something tonight, so we really appreciate it.
I knew this was.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I knew this was going to be a great show. So you guys hang on there just a minute. If you like metal detecting shows like this, let us remind you to go to Beyond Sight and Sound with Josh Kimmel on Sunday night and Wednesday night. And then All Metal Mode is on Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. American Digger Relic Roundup follows that on Monday night at 9 o'clock Eastern. History Seekers is on Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Hardcore Metal Detecting has shows on Thursday and Saturday at 8 p.m. And XP Team USA is on every other Friday night, and they are on at 8 o'clock Eastern. And obviously, me and Tennessee Jeff will be right back here on Relics Radio next Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Relics Radio. We really do appreciate it. Be sure and join us live each Thursday night at 7 o'clock Central Time, 8 o'clock Eastern here on Spreaker. Or you can catch the archive show at Relics Radio on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, or iTunes. Please take a minute and hit the like button and be sure and follow us so that you'll get notifications of all of our upcoming broadcasts. You can also find us on YouTube at Digging with Seven or Tennessee Jeff, or you can check us out on our Relics Radio Facebook page. If you'd like to get in touch with us, then send an email to diggingwith7@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you'll join us next Thursday night, and until then, get out there and dig some history.